The boarding gate was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that blankets early flights before the world wakes up. At gate 14B, bleary-eyed travelers shuffled in with coffee cups, dragging roller bags and business phones, half awake and wholly distracted. A young mother whispered bribes to her toddler. 2 college athletes argued about protein bars. Nothing felt unusual until she stepped into view. She didn't make a sound. No one heard her approach. She wore a worn canvas hoodie over straight, dark hair and carried an old duffel that slung low on one shoulder like it had known more years than the airline itself. Blue-tinted glasses, simple, maybe prescription, maybe not, hid her eyes. No jewelry, no makeup. Her boarding pass, printed and slightly creased, was held like a formality, not an identity. Morning. The gate agent mumbled without lifting his head. She didn't answer. Just nodded once. Row 9A, window seat. As she stepped past the first-class cabin, her head turned, barely, but just enough for First Officer Greg Harlan to notice from the cockpit. There was something in the way she walked. Not stiff, not rushed, controlled, balanced. Like someone who knew exactly how much space she occupied and exactly how much to give away. It lasted all of 2 seconds, but it stayed with him. She took her seat without adjusting anything. Her duffel went under the seat ahead. She folded her hands and sat with the kind of stillness people mistake for detachment. No phone. No earbuds. No idle chatter. She wasn't avoiding the world, she just didn't need it. That, in itself, was strange. Next to her, in seat 9B, sat a silver-haired man in a tailored blazer, already halfway through the Wall Street Journal. Across the aisle, the 2 athletes were still arguing, now about seat recline rights. Behind her, a baby cried softly. None of it seemed to register with her. Her head tilted ever so slightly toward the window as the plane taxied. Her eyes not just watching but calculating. At 6:53 a.m., Flight 228 lifted off the tarmac. At 7:02, everything changed. The first jolt came sharp and sudden. Not turbulence, something else. Seatbelt lights blinked. Gas rippled through the cabin. One woman cried out. Others tightened their grips on armrests. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor mechanical anomaly. Please remain seated. Passengers clung to those words, minor anomaly. But she didn't flinch. Her fingers tightened, not in fear, but focus. Her eyes scanned the wing, the vapor trail, the flight angle. Something was wrong, and it wasn't turbulence. The plane was climbing unevenly. She knew the signs. In the cockpit, warnings stacked like dominoes. Primary engine pressure fluctuating. Stabilizers slow to respond. Yaw drift increasing. Captain Dan Riggs and First Officer Harlan exchanged glances. Something's failing, Dan said quietly. Harlan didn't respond. His eyes had already darted back to the cabin, toward row 9. Something gnawed at his instincts. Back in seat 9A, the woman had pulled out a small sketchbook, no larger than a passport. She began drawing, not doodling. Mapping. Diagramming the aircraft from memory. Lines sharp, accurate. She noted airflow vectors, engine housing, pressure paths. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times. The man beside her finally spoke. "You fly?" he asked, glancing at the intricate drawings. She didn't answer. Her pencil paused at the tail assembly, then moved on. It wasn't time to talk. In the cockpit, another jolt hit. Harder. Overhead bins sprang open. A laptop shot across the aisle. A child screamed. Oxygen masks didn't fall, but the terror was real. That's when Harlan noticed it. Her wrist. The cuff of her hoodie had slipped back. Etched into the pale skin of her forearm, half obscured by shadows, was a tattoo. It wasn't decorative, it was designed concentric rings of symbols and one word in the center. Ick. His blood ran cold. "Captain," Harlan said, voice trembling. "Sate 9A, you need to see it." Riggs leaned over. One look and his hand froze mid-air. A name flashed through his mind, not from flight school, not from airline training, but from whispered stories, redacted reports, and black and white photos with no labels. He reached for the intercom, his voice barely held together. "If Maverick is on board, we need your help." The cabin went silent. Heads turned toward her, but she didn't move. Not at first. She simply closed the sketchbook, placed it gently back into her duffel, adjusted her collar, and rose. The tray clicked up. Her boots hit the aisle. The man in 9B stammered, "Ooh, who are you?" She didn't reply. She walked forward with a precision no one had seen before. The passengers parted, not from fear, but reverence. They felt it. The captain unlocked the cockpit door without question, and when she entered, the atmosphere changed, not just in the cockpit, but the entire plane. Like pressure had equalized around her. She didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. She didn't ask for permission, she acted. At 7:02 a.m., Flight 228 crossed into altitude levels where the clouds should have opened like morning curtains. Instead, the cabin jolted once, then twice, like something under the aircraft had given way. The motion wasn't typical turbulence. It was wrong. Too sharp, too sudden. Something wasn't flowing. It was failing. Gasps rippled across the fuselage. An overhead bin popped open and a carry-on bag thudded to the floor. Somewhere in row 12, a toddler started to wail. A woman clutched the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. Flight attendants moved quickly, snapping into practiced motion, hiding the worry in their eyes. But passengers weren't stupid. They could feel it. This wasn't minor. The captain's voice buzzed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor mechanical anomaly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll keep you informed." But anyone who had flown more than a handful of times knew the difference. This wasn't routine. This was trouble. In seat 9A, however, nothing changed. The woman didn't gasp. She didn't look around. She didn't reach for the emergency card or the call button. Instead, she reached calmly into her duffel and pulled out a notebook and pencil. Military issue, graphite tipped, the kind that doesn't smear under sweat. She snapped down the tray table and opened the notebook to a blank page. Her hands moved fast, not frantic, efficient. She sketched a full-side profile of the Boeing 737, complete with thrust vector alignment and airflow distribution. With a few fluid lines, she marked the wing structure, tail fins, engine mounts, and pressure balance routes. Her left hand kept the notebook steady while her right marked shifts in airspeed, the deviation in thrust lines, and, above all, the asymmetry in climb angle. She circled the left intake nacelle. That was it. That was where the drift began. Beside her, the man in 90B had abandoned his newspaper. He stared, not at her face, but at her focus. "You an engineer or something?" he asked, half joking, half nervous. She didn't answer. A faint rumble vibrated through the floor, then faded. Pressure fluctuations. The cabin lights flickered again. Row 16's reading lamps went dark, then brightened. Someone 3 rows back whispered a prayer. And yet the woman in 9A just kept drawing. In the cockpit, things were escalating fast. Engine pressures unstable. First Officer Greg Harlan said, trying to keep his voice level. Left intakes dropping. Backup response is delayed by almost 3 seconds. "That's not turbulence," Captain Dan Riggs muttered. He adjusted the yoke, but the resistance was uneven. "It's internal. Something's degrading." The warning panel lit again. Another blinking red hydraulic pressure imbalance. "That can't be right," Harlan said. "It doesn't match the diagnostic flow tree." And that's when Riggs felt it, not just the drift, but the instability. The plane was no longer responding to software corrections. It was adapting, reacting, as if some system deep in its mechanical brain had already started to fail and was now guessing. Back in the cabin, she was already ahead of it. The woman in 9A turned the page in her notebook, drew an isometric of the tail assembly. She circled the lateral stabilizer. Then, below it, the pressure feedback loop. Something about the timing of the vibration, she knew. It wasn't a structural crack. It was corrupted data. That's why the compensators were overreacting. They were being fed false inputs. She paused, tapped her pencil once against the corner of the sketch pad. Then she wrote 4 capital letters beneath the schematic, "Yaw bleed." Left intake mismatch. Then she added one more word, in sharp block lettering, "Time 70 sec." The man next to her noticed her wrist as she reached forward to turn a page. The hoodie sleeve slipped just slightly, revealing the skin of her forearm, pale, worn, and tattooed. It wasn't decorative. It was a symbol etched in layers, a ring of geometric code surrounding a name Mayavirus. He blinked. "That's military, isn't it? That tattoo." No answer. He looked again, more carefully. The symbol wasn't just ink. It was technical. He'd seen things like that in briefing rooms years ago, back when he'd done government consulting. But not like this. Not so small, so elegant, so deliberately hidden. In the cockpit, Harlan glanced back toward the cabin instinctively. His mind returned to the woman in the hoodie, the one who didn't look afraid, the one who, for some reason, had made something in his gut twist. "Captain," he said, voice a bit tighter. I think we need to check seat 9A. Riggs frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Just look." The captain leaned slightly, scanning down the aisle through the tiny gap in the flight deck door. She was easy to miss. Still, silent, focused. But then he saw it, the sleeve, the forearm, the ink. His breath caught. He knew that symbol. Not from manuals. From memory. It was the kind of thing that lived in the footnotes of classified reports. It wasn't in the system. It was outside the system. He reached for the intercom, pressed the button. His voice trembled, but only once. "If Maverick is on board, we could use your help." All motion in the cabin ceased. Passengers turned to each other, confused, curious. Then they turned to her. She didn't move right away. She finished the last mark on her diagram, closed the notebook, slid it into the side pocket of her duffel, pulled her sleeve back down, adjusted her collar, and then she stood. Captain Dan Riggs had seen plenty in 30 years of flying, from engine failures over the Rockies to bird strikes on final approach. But nothing had ever made the hair on his arms rise like this moment. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes through the flight deck's reinforced viewing slit. The woman in 9A had just risen from her seat, silent and composed. The motion of her arm, the way she tucked her notebook away, and especially that tattoo, etched like code into her skin, was not lost on him. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a clearance code, buried in concentric rings, wrapping around one name in precision lettering, Maverick. The breath caught in his chest. That name, that call sign, not part of the Air Force registry, not in any Navy flight logs, not even among the classified pilot rosters. But if you'd spent enough time in the shadows of Black Ops hangars, if you'd listened closely in command briefings, when people stopped talking and started whispering, you knew it. Maverick wasn't a person. She was a whisper. A problem solver when the manuals ran out of pages. A ghost who showed up when systems failed and someone had to improvise on the edge of physics. She was the one people swore didn't exist, until things went sideways. "Captain," First Officer Greg Harlan asked, glancing at the intercom panel, "was that really necessary?" Riggs didn't respond at first. He was still staring. Then he murmured almost to himself, "I flew out of Kandahar once. Spring of '08. Night landing, 0 visibility. We were told a drone swarm had gone rogue. The only thing that kept the base from losing power was some off-book override written into the stabilizer matrix. They said it was one of hers." Greg blinked. "Her." Riggs turned slowly. "She helped design the override logic on these planes 7 years ago, before any of us ever touched this model." The younger man looked stunned. "But I thought Lockhart wrote that code." "I did." Riggs nodded. "But he didn't write it alone." Meanwhile, in the cabin, every eye had fixed on her, but no one said a word. The woman in 9A didn't flinch under their stares. She simply adjusted her footing, tucked a loose strand of hair behind one ear, and made her way forward. Not fast, not slow, just intentional. She moved like the ISIL was designed around her, like she'd walked the skeleton of this aircraft before it ever left the factory floor. When she reached the cockpit door, Riggs opened it without waiting. And in that instant, the atmosphere shifted, not just in the flight deck, but throughout the plane. The tension didn't ease, it focused. The same way soldiers stand taller when someone who's been through more than they have enters the room. She stepped inside. Didn't speak, just scanned the panels with trained eyes, reading not just the screens, but the lag between them, the pattern in their failures. "Mom," Riggs said cautiously. "Are you?" She cut in softly. "You already know who I am," and somehow he did. Not because of her face, it wasn't familiar, but her presence, the way she moved, the way the cockpit responded to her, that was unmistakable. The layout was standard twin-engine indicators, hydraulic gauges, backup flow charts, fault tree systems. But her eyes moved faster than either man could track. In under 5 seconds, she had the full picture. "You're losing thrust because the hydraulic bypass is receiving corrupted data," she explained. "It's not the engine, it's the input. You've got a feedback loop that's trying to correct an error that isn't real." That's why you're drifting into yaw. The system thinks you're flying uphill, but the nose is level. Greg blinked. That doesn't even show on the fault tree yet. It will, she said calmly, in about 70 seconds. She dropped to one knee and reached beneath the co-pilot's seat, unsnapping a panel most commercial pilots had never touched. Her fingers moved quickly, counting rotary switches by feel. You're 6 minutes from total control loss if you keep trusting those readings, she said. 7 if you hold level. But if you give me access to the manual flow regulator near the tail housing, I can reroute the logic before it cascades. The captain stood frozen. He looked at her face, then at the tattoo now clearly visible in the full light of the cockpit, and that call sign, Maverick, embedded in a band of technical script no civilian could interpret. Wait, Greg whispered. You're the one Lockhart never named, the engineer behind the military override specs. I was never officially listed, she said. Lockhart didn't trust documentation. Neither did I. But your name. Your record? Deleted? She said plainly. At my request. Riggs exhaled, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the rumors from back channels, the unconfirmed flight logs, the simulations that couldn't be replicated. You're not on the manifest, he said. I know, she replied. I'm not supposed to be. Outside the door, whispers traveled through the cabin like wildfire. Some passengers had seen enough to connect the dots. Others just felt the change in energy. In row 17C, a retired Air Force mechanic leaned back slowly and muttered, "She's real. I'll need access to the tail panel," Maverick said. "It's under the floor, behind the rear galley. Once I'm in, I'll be below sensor coverage. If something goes wrong, you won't be able to help me." Riggs didn't hesitate. "Do what you need. Greg, get her a harness and a toolkit. Lock the access path." Greg paused. We're letting a civilian crawl into the mechanicals of a failing aircraft." Riggs looked him square in the eye. "She's not a civilian, and she wasn't. Because 7 years ago, before this aircraft model had ever cleared for commercial use, before it had ever carried a single passenger, she'd been there. She had helped design it, not for fame, not for credit, but because some problems didn't belong in the light. Some problems needed ghosts to solve them. And today one of those ghosts had appeared, Seat 9A, on the exact day this system chose to fail. That wasn't coincidence. It was contingency. The captain's voice had gone hoarse, not from fear but from awe. She had just identified a cascading hydraulic fault chain in under a minute. No checklist, no software. Just her eyes, her mind, and that tattoo. "Maverick?" he muttered again, like he needed to hear it aloud to believe it. But the woman didn't react. She wasn't here for nostalgia. "I need to get to the tail flow regulator," she said, standing straight. "The feedback corruption is looped into your tertiary flap input. It's tricking the compensators. If I don't reroute the control logic manually, you're going to lose elevator authority in under 6 minutes." Riggs stared. "You can fix that? In flight?" "Yes," she answered flatly. "But only if I go now." The cockpit was dead quiet. Greg Harlan looked to the captain, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not cleared. We can't just let." "She wrote the override architecture," Riggs said, cutting him off. "This plane is reacting because it remembers her. Give her what she needs." The word traveled fast. By the time she stepped into the rear of the cabin, a path had already opened. No announcements were made, no orders given, but people moved, quietly, respectfully, like something larger than fear was at play now. Row by row, passengers turned to watch, not with panic but with wonder. She walked like a woman who had rehearsed this mission in her mind 100 times. Her boots struck the aisle with quiet assurance, her shoulders steady, her eyes never wavered. She paused at the galley. A flight attendant stood frozen near the rear access hatch, holding a utility kit and a safety harness she didn't remember retrieving. "You're not cleared for that compartment," the attendant said, voice quivering. "I'm not a passenger," Maverick replied, taking the harness. With one clean motion, she opened the narrow floor panel near the bulkhead, hidden behind catering equipment, and the cold air rushed up instantly. The scent of hydraulic fluid and scorched composite filled the galley. No one spoke, no one moved. She clipped in, and then she vanished into the dark. Inside the access tunnel, the world changed. No more lights, no cabin noise. Just the hum of systems barely holding together. Her breath came slow and even, like she'd done this more times than she could count. The space was tight, just wide enough to crawl, shoulders brushing conduits and insulation foam. The red glow of system nodes pulsed around her like warning beacons in a mine shaft. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved with a rhythm. Feel trace. Confirm reroute. Wire bundle. Check. Pressure sync loop trace. Junction relay 12 hot. She whispered aloud to herself, not out of fear, but tempo. 42 seconds. No slip. Left stabilizer response 5% off. Centered it. Then she found it. A scorched junction box, the casing half melted. The fault she had predicted in the cockpit. The corrupted node was bleeding false data into the trim regulators. There you are, she murmured. She pulled a small black case from her thigh pocket and snapped it open. Inside, a rewrote module the size of her palm. It looked homemade, but military precise. 2 magnetic clamps, 1 torque key. That was all she needed. She worked in silence, only the groan of the aircraft above reminding her that every second mattered. The panel trembled slightly as altitude shifted. She muttered, "Don't drop speed. Not yet. Just hold." Her left hand steadied the coil as her right drove the clamps into place. The new rote fused with a faint pop, then a flicker. The green indicator light blinked once, then held. She smiled. Just barely, then whispered 30 seconds to equalize. Up in the cockpit, readings began to level. Yaw drift is correcting, Harlan said, disbelief in his voice. Throttles stable, rigs confirmed. Pitch control, holding. By God, it's holding. They looked at each other, then toward the cabin. Riggs didn't speak. He just sat back, stared straight ahead, and breathed for the first time in 10 minutes. How the hell? Harlan whispered, did we ever let her go? Back in the tail access corridor, Maverick exhaled. She tightened the last bolt, locked the new circuit, and tapped the node twice with her knuckle. It answered with a low click. Green, solid, stable. She crawled backward, her knees aching, jacket sinned, cheeks streaked with oil. But her eyes, calm, alive, exact. She emerged through the same panel she had disappeared into, like she'd returned from somewhere deeper than the aircraft itself. The flight attendant gasped slightly at the sight of her. She didn't smile, didn't nod. She just returned the toolkit, unhooked the harness, and stepped back into the aisle. And once again, the passengers moved aside, not out of fear, but respect. She walked past them all, quiet, grace still on her hands, her hair stuck to her forehead. She looked utterly unremarkable and absolutely unforgettable. When she returned to the cockpit, the systems had stabilized. The alarms had stopped. The data streams were clean. Flight 228 was flying steady once more. She didn't ask for thanks. She didn't explain what she'd done. She just looked to the captain and said, "Manual dampeners are set. Don't trust the tertiary flaps. They're still giving ghost signals. Descend 2,000 feet, but stay above cloud level. You'll hold stability through the next 10 minutes. Riggs nodded slowly. Understood. She paused at the cockpit door, hand on the latch. Then turned and said, "She'll this in 5 minutes no matter what." And just like that, she left. Back to row 9A, back to the window, back to silence. The aircraft was steady for now. Altitude had been stabilized. The hydraulic fault was routed. Cabin pressure was holding at a safer margin. But Captain Dan Riggs wasn't relaxing. Neither was First Officer Greg Harlan. They knew what came next. Because while the override Maverick had built held, it wasn't meant to fly through what loomed ahead. From the cockpit windows, clouds no longer looked soft. They looked jagged. Towering walls of ice and lightning lit by bursts so close the arcs flickered across their instruments. The worst of the system was just 20 miles ahead. A triple-cell convergence, microbursts, updraft spirals, and thermal slicing, the kind of atmospheric conditions that made even combat pilots call it quits. Commercial protocol dictated one thing: abort course and divert. But as Captain Riggs reached for the comms panel, Maverick re-entered the cockpit. Her boots were still smudged with grease. Her jacket had burn marks on the sleeve. Her face was calm, but her eyes, those weren't civilian eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had flown through worse, someone who had stopped waiting for orders long ago. She looked over the instruments, her brow furrowing slightly as the weather readout updated again. "We've got less than 2 minutes before the corridor closes," she said, voice even. "If we don't thread it, we'll be trapped on the wrong side of 3 converging systems." Greg's hand hovered over the autopilot switch. "You're saying we fly through that?" "I'm saying," she said, stepping forward, "I'll fly through it." Riggs stared at her. "You want the controls." "I don't want them," she said simply. "But you're going to lose this plane. If someone doesn't take them, who knows what she's feeling." Riggs hesitated. Every protocol in his training said no. Every regulation said she wasn't certified, wasn't legal, wasn't even listed. But everything else, the storm ahead, the systems behind, the trembling in his hands, said otherwise. He slowly took his hands off the yoke, and she stepped in. From the moment Maverick wrapped her fingers around the controls, something changed. The plane responded, not just functionally, but intuitively, as if the airframe remembered her hands, as if the systems, for all their complexity, had been waiting for her rhythm. She didn't call out standard procedures. She didn't cite angles or ask for confirmation. She simply moved, like the storm ahead was a song she already knew the melody to. The aircraft tilted slightly, just enough to catch the wind shift without resisting it. Instead of fighting the updraft, she leaned into it, rode the edge like a surfer navigating a rogue wave. Greg's mouth opened slightly. "She's not flying against it," he whispered. "She's reading it." Riggs just nodded. "She's dancing with it." Outside, the storm erupted. Lightning cracked across the windshield, so bright it washed the cabin in white. Wind surged upward, then dropped without warning. The jet lurched, oxygen masks deployed, passengers screamed, but the aircraft never lost center. Inside, Maverick's hands moved with precision commercial training never taught. Manual pitch trim, adjusted. Left rudder, tapped twice, not held. Throttle reduction, not uniform, but alternating to match turbulence rotation. She used her wrists more than her arms, tiny muscular corrections, faster than the flight computers could replicate. Alarms blared. Autopilot disengaged. The radar flickered with static, and still she flew. Down in the cabin, people sat frozen. A child near the rear looked up at his mother and whispered, "Is she flying the plane?" The woman only nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. At 28,000 feet, they hit the first crossburst, the kind of jolt that tore off wingtips in Vietnam-era fighters. Maverick countered it with a 1-degree yaw adjustment and throttled the right engine just enough to rebalance airflow. The co-pilot glanced at the readings in disbelief. That's not in any manual." "It's not supposed to be," Riggs said quietly. "You can't teach this." The jet dove slightly, not uncontrolled, but guided. She had seen the corridor, a thin sliver of calmer air like a needle eye in a hurricane. Most pilots wouldn't trust it. She didn't need to. "Flaps 30, she called suddenly, not a suggestion, an order. Greg scrambled to comply. The aircraft dropped again, then leveled, sliding into that corridor like a thread being pulled by an invisible hand. Control tower chatter returned in a static burst. "Flight 228, confirm control. You just dodged 3 storm cells and cleared a wall that's turned back 2 military jets in the past week. Confirm control." Maverick tapped the comm switch with one finger. Confirmed. Then silence. Captain Riggs sat back in stunned silence. Sweat rolled down the side of his face. Greg didn't speak. Neither did she. Because she wasn't finished. Ahead lay the final descent path, narrow, unstable, threatened by another microburst cell developing just east of the field. The automated system recommended go around. Maverick overrode it. "We'll go now," she said. "If we delay, the tail crosswind will twist us on approach." Riggs blinked. "You can land this in that." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She lowered the nose, adjusted thrust, deployed the speed brakes by hand. The descent was aggressive, never reckless. But it was the kind that emptied stomachs and made hearts pound. Some passengers fainted. Others gripped their seats until their knuckles turned blue. And still she flew. Landing gear dropped at 4,000 feet. The runway came into view, barely, through sheets of rain and distorted glass. Flaps full. Airspeed 142 knots. Wind gust 23 to 29 muffed one last shear. She timed it perfectly. The tires kissed asphalt like a sigh. No bounce, no screech. Just stillness. Even before the captain could touch the brakes, The tower radioed again. Who's flying that jet? But no one answered? Because Maverick had already released the yoke. Already stood. And without a word, she stepped back from the controls, just as silently as she'd stepped in. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't even wait for acknowledgement. By the time the cabin lights came up, she was gone. No name, no log entry, no explanation, just that call sign Mev Rice scribbled in pen on the final incident report. And 203 souls who now understood that sometimes the person who saves your life isn't on the manifest, but was always meant to be on that flight. The wheels kissed the runway like the end of a whispered prayer. Not a jolt, not a screech, just stillness. A kind of hush that rolled through the cabin like fog, thick with disbelief and breathless relief. The plane slowed, engines humming low, flaps retracting, brakes easing, systems catching up with what just happened. Flight 228 had landed. 203 souls had survived, but no one moved. Not until she did. Maverick unbuckled her seatbelt in row 9A and rose without a sound. No applause followed, no cheers, just eyes, every eye, fixed on her. Not in fear, not even confusion, reverence. She didn't carry a bag, she didn't wear a badge. There was no flight uniform, no ribbons, no insignia, just a grease-stained jacket, a worn canvas backpack, and a presence that felt like gravity, quiet, steady, inescapable. As she moved toward the front of the aircraft, even the flight attendants stepped aside. She paused only once, just long enough to glance at the co-pilot. He didn't speak, he couldn't. He just nodded slowly, like someone saluting without raising a hand. And then she was gone. No debrief, no statement, no press. By the time ground crews finished aligning the stair truck, she'd already disappeared past the jet bridge. Inside the terminal, passengers spilled out, some sobbing, some silent, most just trying to understand what they'd lived through. One teenage girl clutched her phone, trying to record a voice note, but couldn't stop her hands from shaking. A man in his 70s stared back toward gate 16, whispering. She walked like she belonged in that storm. No one approached her. No one needed to. But someone was watching. Across the concourse, near a door marked Authorized Personnel, a man in a charcoal gray suit stood motionless. No name badge, no carry-on, just a straight spine, folded hands, and eyes that had seen too much. When Maverick appeared from the crowd, she didn't flinch. She saw him instantly. Just the way her head tilted, subtle, controlled, said everything. She'd expected this, maybe even before the plane took off. He stepped forward. "Mom," he said, voice low, almost respectful. She gave a short nod. "There's a car waiting," he added. "Not here." She blinked. Once. "Classified containment." He hesitated. "Protocol review." "You already pulled the black box." He shook his head. "We didn't have to." Her brow lifted. "The pilot hit the distress beacon mid-flight," he said. "Audio logs caught everything. You're on record." She didn't respond. "I've been asked to escort you." "I don't need an escort." "I know," he said quietly. "But someone above my pay grade does." She stopped walking. "Ooh," he looked her in the eye, then said, "Admiral Reinhold." That made her pause, not visibly, but something in her shoulders changed, ever so slightly. The kind of shift that only happens when a name you've buried resurfaces without warning. Reinhold. The man who gave her the call sign. The man who knew what she was before the programs were even given code names. The man who was supposed to have disappeared 5 years ago with her. "Where is he?" she asked, voice now cold. The agent didn't answer right away. "He's waiting." The SUV they rode in was black, unmarked, with no plates. The windows were tinted to a mirror shine. The driver wore sunglasses despite being under a concrete overhang. Inside, the man in the suit sat silent until they passed the last of the terminal structures. "You still fly?" he asked, watching her through the rearview mirror. Her answer was quiet. "Steady. I never stopped," he nodded. "They told me your file was deleted," he said. "It was," she replied. "But Reinhold kept a copy." "I figured as much. They also said he never assigned you officially." "He didn't," she said. "Not on paper." The road twisted, leaving city routes behind. Chain link fences turned to concrete barriers. Vegetation thinned. Then came a gate, rusted, unmarked, but still operational. It opened without a sound. Beyond it, an old helipod. 2 hangars. And a bunker that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. The SUV stopped. "This where I disappear again?" she asked dryly. The man only opened the door. Inside the bunker, the air was cold. The walls smelled of oil and old decisions. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. In the center of the room, a workstation lit up with satellite uplinks and security feeds. And there, standing behind it, was Admiral James Reinhold, grayer now, slower, but unmistakably him. She didn't salute. He didn't ask her to. "You really were on that flight," he said, voice rougher than she remembered. "You had it flagged. I had your name flagged, just in case." She crossed her arms. "You were tracking me. I was watching," he said, "to see if the world ever remembered you." "They weren't supposed to." He looked at her carefully. "And yet 2 to 3 people just walked off a plane because you acted. That's not something I can ignore." "You should," she replied, like last time. He didn't speak, just turned to the monitor and loaded a file. It wasn't from the flight. It was surveillance, time-stamped just hours earlier. 2 men entering a restricted hangar in Nevada. One carried a duffel bag. The other held a file stamped Mavericksy, ESOOY. She leaned forward. "I don't recognize them." Reinhold's voice dropped. "Someone's trying to restart the program." Silence. "Without you." She turned away. "Then shut it down." "I can't." She spun back. "They don't want me, James. They want the version of me they think they can control. And that's the problem," he said quietly. "They think you're gone." She said nothing. "They think your reappearance was a fluke," Reinhold continued. "But they also know better now. You exposed the cracks they were trying to bury." She stared at him, jaw tight. "Then fix it," she said. "Erase me again." He didn't blink. "That's not what worries me." She frowned. "Then what does?" He looked at her with eyes that no longer belonged to a soldier, but to a man afraid of the choices only she could make. "That you might say yes if they asked you." The hum of the monitors in the underground bunker filled the silence between them. Admiral James Reinhold stood with his hand resting on the edge of the console, watching her as if waiting for something. Not an answer, but a truth she hadn't admitted yet. Across from him, Maverick, still in the same torn jacket, dust on her boots, grayed her hands, stood unmoved. Her posture hadn't shifted. Her face revealed nothing. But something in the air had changed, and Reinhold, with all his years of command and damage control, could feel it. "You still believe in it," he said softly. She didn't reply. "In the mission, the purpose. You still think it matters." She exhaled slowly through her nose, eyes still on the screen showing the surveillance footage. Those 2 men entering the hangar, holding the file with her call sign like they owned it. Like they could rebuild what they never understood. "No," she finally said. "I believe someone has to do it, and too many of the right people are already gone." Reinhold turned, walked to a side table, and poured 2 cups of coffee from an old steel carafe. He handed her one without asking if she wanted it. She took it anyway. Years ago, it had been ritual, a moment of normalcy in a world designed to erase itself. He sat. She didn't. "You know why they're bringing it back," he said. "They never shut it down," she answered. "They just buried it deeper." He nodded. "You surfacing again, whether you meant to or not, blew the lid off that." "I didn't surface," she snapped, for the first time breaking the stillness in her voice. "I sat in a seat I was assigned. I stayed silent. I was ready to die in silence like I've done a dozen times before." Reinhold didn't flinch. "But you didn't," he said. "You stood up. You took the controls. You saved that aircraft, and everyone on board saw it. You knew what that meant." She set the coffee down, untouched. "I didn't act for them," she said. "I acted because I knew what was going wrong. Because no one else could fix it in time." "Exactly," he said, leaning forward. "That's why you were created." She looked away. Outside the bunker, the wind shifted. Dust spiraled through the silent hangars, and somewhere far above, another aircraft passed in the stratosphere, its sound barely a memory by the time it reached the ground. Inside, the air remained heavy. "You were the contingency," Reinhold said. "The one we called when the plans stopped working. The system doesn't know how to handle people like you. That's why they erased you." She stepped toward the monitor, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. The footage was still looping. Those men, that file, the beginning of something dangerous. You said they're trying to reactivate it, she said, without me. Reinhold nodded. But now they know you're alive. And worse, they know you're active. Then disappear me again. He didn't answer. She turned to him. You brought me here to ask, didn't you? I didn't bring you here to recruit you, he said quietly. I brought you here to warn you. That caught her. She narrowed her eyes. Warn me. They won't try to bring you back the way I did, he said. They won't ask. They'll manipulate, force, maybe even frame. And if they can't make you comply, they'll make you vanish, for real this time. She folded her arms. I'm not afraid of dying. No, he said. But I think you're afraid of being used. That hit harder than it should have. There was a long silence. Then she said almost to herself, You think I'll say yes? Reinhold didn't speak. She turned slowly. Say it. Out loud. I think, he said after a pause, that if it came down to it, if you were standing at the edge of another failure, if no one else stepped up, you'd walk right back into hell. She stared at him, unmoving, not because they asked you to, he continued, but because deep down, you still think it's your responsibility. Her jaw tightened. You were trained to disappear, he said, to leave no trace. But what they didn't plan for was that you'd keep watching, that you'd still care. And that makes you dangerous? To them? She asked. To everyone, he replied. She walked toward the far wall of the bunker. A faded map still hung there, dotted with pins and strings from some other lifetime. She ran a finger along a line that once connected a failed satellite program to a flight corridor no longer on civilian maps. I was 19 when you found me, she said, sitting in an ops trailer in Arizona, rewriting flight logic because the contractor code didn't make sense. I remember, he said. You looked at me like you already knew who I was going to become. I did. She turned to face him. But you didn't stop them when they erased me, he nodded, because you told me not to. She looked away. At the exit of the bunker, the man in the charcoal suit was waiting. He didn't speak, just nodded. A vehicle idled quietly outside, its engine barely louder than the desert wind. Reinhold stood. Where will you go? He asked. Back underground, she replied. Where I belong. He watched her for a moment, then said, There's a boy, from that flight. Followed you through the terminal. She blinked. He saw you for who you were? Reinhold said. You gave him something. A coin, we think. Something off record. Same unit markers you used to carry. She didn't react. He's the reason people are still talking, he added. They tried to spin the story, but they couldn't, because a child told the truth before the officials could lie. She stepped toward the door. I'm not coming back, she said. He didn't argue. But as she reached for the handle, he asked one last question. If it happens again, if something breaks and no one else is there, will you still sit in row 9? She didn't answer right away. Then, without turning back, she said quietly, I never left it. And then she walked into the morning light. Not a soldier, not a hero, but a name they had tried to erase. Erin failed. The official report from Flight 228 was brief. Mechanical anomaly, system override, emergency landing successful, no fatalities, investigation ongoing, no mention of the woman in seat 9A, no call sign, no name. Just a footnote scribbled by a trembling hand on the final page. Assistance provided by unknown individual, believed to be a former systems engineer. But for those on board, the truth didn't fade. In the days and weeks that followed, they couldn't forget the way she moved, the way she stepped into the cockpit like it belonged to her, the way the aircraft seemed to bend to her touch. And most of all, the silence. She didn't boast, didn't explain. She simply flew. Passenger statements flooded forums, news sites, and message boards. She walked like gravity didn't apply to her. I swear the plane responded before she even moved. She was calm when even the captain shook. She saved my child. She saved all of us. But not everyone believed. Airline executives dismissed the story as embellished memory under stress. Government spokesmen referred to a coordinated team effort. The press speculated about rogue software updates, AI-assisted recovery, even secret military remote intervention. But the people on that plane knew better, especially one boy. He was only 9 at the time, seat waiting F. A window seat he'd begged his mom for. His first flight ever. He remembered the turbulence, the jolt so hard his juice box hit the ceiling. He remembered the screaming, the crying, the masks that dropped like ghosts. And he remembered her. Long after the plane touched down, after the flight crew tried to calm everyone, after the jet bridge opened, he saw her walking away. No one stopped her. No one dared. Her boots made no sound, but her presence moved like wind. He slipped away from his parents, wove through the crowd, and followed her down the terminal. She never looked back. Not once. But somehow when he was within 3 steps of her, she stopped, turned, and looked down at him. Her face wasn't what he expected. It wasn't cold, or hard, or even tired. It was kind. He looked up, trembling a little, and asked the only thing his young heart could put into words. "Are you an angel?" She crouched, just enough to meet his eyes, and said softly, "No. But I used to fly with them." Then she reached into her coat, pulled something from the inside pocket, and placed it in his hand. A coin, heavy, black metal, edges worn. No text, no serial, just a symbol in the center V2R and beneath it SVR. Before he could ask what it meant, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound, just a breeze as the terminal doors whispered shut behind her. He kept the coin. Didn't tell his parents. Didn't tell the reporters or the airline or the teachers who asked him to draw what he remembered. He just held onto it, tucked into a box, hidden beneath layers of boyhood things, action figures, broken toys, paper planes. But as he grew older, the coin stayed close. First on a chain around his neck, then on his desk when he studied, then in his flight bag. Because yes, he became a pilot. Not because he wanted to chase the skies. Because he'd once seen someone own them. Years later, in a quiet hangar on a desert base, a senior flight instructor paused during a solo debrief. The new pilot, clean-cut, quiet, sharp, had just pulled off a maneuver most cadets failed in simulation. The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. The young man shrugged. Just made sense. He handed over his logbook. As the instructor flipped to the back page, something slid out. A coin. Black worn. The instructor's fingers froze. He'd seen one like it. Once. A long time ago. But he said nothing. Instead, he looked at the logbook again. The name read Ely Cross. The instructor closed the book slowly. "You ever hear of someone named Maverick?" he asked, casually. The young man smiled just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "But I don't think she wanted to be remembered." And that's how her legend lived on. Not in official records, not in documentaries or medals, but in stories passed between runways, whispered in flight debriefs, etched in the edge of a coin no one could trace. Some said she was a ghost. Some said she never existed at all. But others, those who sat in row 9, those who watched her fly, they knew. They knew what it looked like when a plane was falling apart and someone didn't panic, didn't ask for clearance, didn't need permission. She just flew. And somewhere, even now, pilots still glance at 9A on boarding and wonder, and hope? Because sometimes when everything else fails, a ghost might still be sitting there, quiet, waiting. And if you ask her if she's an angel, she might just smile and say no. But I used to fly with them. Flight 228 had landed safely. The passengers had disembarked. The press eventually moved on. But something strange happened in the weeks that followed. The data pulled from the black box didn't add up. Investigators at the National Transportation Safety Board spent days combing through every log, every electrical reading, every fault tree analysis. The aircraft had suffered a multi-layered hydraulic failure combined with input corruption from stabilizer sensors, a perfect storm of cascading anomalies. According to every simulation run since, the flight should have resulted in a catastrophic loss of control. But it didn't. Because someone, somehow, had executed a series of manual overrides so precisely, so perfectly timed, that not even the aircraft's own systems recognized them in real time. Whoever did this, one NTSB engineer muttered during a review, didn't follow any known protocol. They made decisions before the failures even registered. Another replied, "These are anticipatory responses, like someone was seeing through the systems." The logs didn't show her name. She'd never logged into the avionics suite. She'd never activated a flight crew code. And yet, She had touched every key system, manually, with a familiarity that unnerved even the people who designed them. A flight safety analyst at the FAA flagged the sequence. He recognized a pattern, a signature. But when he tried to track the source, he found nothing. The ID tag left on the rewrote node had been issued 12 years earlier under a project that had been officially canceled and sealed by the Department of Defense. The only notation on file, contributor Silas Safidi, callsign Maverick, the airline, desperate to shift focus, issued a public statement thanking the crew and systems engineers for their resilience under pressure. They didn't name her. They didn't know how. Because she wasn't in any employee database. She didn't carry credentials. She had no flight record, no FAA medical certificate, no maintenance technician license. Every route they took to verify her presence hit a dead end. At first, a few tried to suggest that the story was overblown, that fear and adrenaline had altered passengers' memories, that the woman in 9A was just another civilian who stayed calm, maybe offered advice, maybe assisted with comms. But the passengers, the crew, they weren't having it. They knew what they saw. The flight attendants remembered the way she moved down the aisle, like every bolt and bulkhead had been memorized. Greg Harlan, the co-pilot, couldn't sleep for nights. He kept hearing her voice in his dreams. Calm, instructive, always a step ahead of the plane. He would later transfer to a defense contractor flight research program, and Captain Riggs. He never flew again without checking seat 9A. He once told a friend, off the record, "I've flown through combat storms, bird strikes, engine shutdowns, but nothing felt like that day. That woman flew like the aircraft belonged to her soul, like the sky would have mourned if she failed." The passengers began telling their stories online. One woman described the way oxygen masks had deployed and people had screamed, but she remembered the calm. She remembered seeing Maverick standing near the cockpit door, hair damp with sweat, jacket singed, eyes sharp and alive. "She didn't look like she was rescuing us," the woman wrote. "She looked like she wasn't going to let the plane go down on her watch." And then there was the boy, Ely Cross. He kept that black coin tucked in a small velvet pouch. Never showed it to anyone unless he trusted them completely. He didn't need it to prove anything. Because for him, her existence wasn't a question. It was the reason he became a pilot. When asked during his final training evaluation why he'd joined the program, he said, "Because someone flew a plane out of a storm no one thought could be crossed, and didn't stick around to be thanked. I want to be that kind of pilot." As years passed, stories of the mysterious woman in 9A began to circulate among aviation communities. Some called her an angel, some called her a myth, but those who'd been on Flight 228, they used a different word, Maverick. No one could prove she existed, but no one dared deny what she had done. Pilots started making small gestures, quiet ones. On the 9th day of every month, some placed a coin on the cockpit dash before takeoff. A few carved a small 9A into the bottom of their ID badge. Others simply left the seat empty, even if the flight was full. In hangars and simulators and dusty old squadrons, people spoke of her like folklore, like wind that arrived before a storm and left without asking for credit. You hear about the woman who saved 228. Yeah, but they never found her. They never needed to. And somewhere, in places without cameras, without records, without questions, she still moved. Still walked airfields at night, checking pressure lines by feel. Still entered hangars through side doors. Still rewrote code in machines not listed on any manifest. Because she wasn't erased. She wasn't retired. She had simply gone back to where she'd always belonged, in the space between silence and salvation. She didn't want to be remembered. She just wanted the world to keep flying. And so they do, thanks to a ghost in row 9A, who was never supposed to be there, but showed up when it mattered most. In life, some people move through our world like the wind, quietly, without applause, without asking for anything. But somehow they leave a mark that never fades. She was just a woman in seat 9A, no name, no title. No one expected her to matter. But when everything began to fall apart, she stood up, not for glory, not for recognition, but because someone had to. That's the lesson. You don't need a spotlight to make a difference. You don't need a rank, a badge, or a crowd cheering your name. You just need to do the right thing, especially when no one's watching. Courage, kindness, and quiet strength don't need to be seen. They just need to show up. And if you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or forgotten, remember this: you might be someone's maverick. You might have saved someone's life without even knowing it. With your words, your presence, your calm, your choice to keep going when it mattered most. Have you ever met someone like Maverick? Someone who never asked for recognition, but changed your life in a way you'll never forget. Share your story in the comments. Let the world remember the people who never asked to be remembered. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. We tell stories about the ones who walk in silence and still save the day, and turn on notifications. Because these are the stories worth hearing first. The world needs to remember the ones who didn't need to be remembered, just to keep it flying. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of them.